Hi all, today I am going to do your overall period 1 review. So we are looking at the APUSH curriculum 1491 to 1607. So we're going to first talk about just in general how important is this period. I'm going to go over the must knows, what do you have to know for each key concept, talk about the causation skill, tell you the I believe it's the 5 most important terms, and then cover how you should review at the end of this video. How should you make sure that you're prepared for either your unit test or for the AP exam in May, and we'll wrap up with some key themes. Okay, so how important is this period? In reality, not. If you only care about the AP exam, then this is such a small fraction of it that if you feel like you're just getting started and maybe you didn't have the best habits, or maybe you're coming back to this period and you're like, wow, that was months ago, I don't quite remember, it's okay. There's really not a lot here that you have to know. So it's only 4 to 6% of the total exam is going to cover this period. For teachers, they recommend that you spend around 8 class periods on it. It will be included in the multiple choice section. It could be on short answer question 3. However, that's an optional question. You have a choice between 3 and 4. It will not be on the DBQ, and it could be on the optional first LEQ question. For more of this type of information, check out my Instagram page, APUSH Lady Boss, where I give lots of tips about the units and lessons. Okay, so here are your 7 topics. Contextualization. Every unit starts with contextualization, and then it really only has 5 content lessons. Native American societies before contact, exploration, the Columbian exchange and conquest, labor systems, and then cultural interactions. And then finally wrapping up with a lesson on causation. I do have a video that covers every single one of these units, or every single one of these lessons. Okay, first key concept. As native populations migrated and settled across the vast expanse of North America over time, they developed distinct and increasingly complex societies by adapting to and transforming their diverse environments. So really, you want to pay attention to the language here of the College Board, because they are the ones, this is the language that you have to know. So really, this key concept is going to be looking at the world before 1492. 1492 marks that transformative event where we see increased interactions between the hemispheres more permanently. So it begins with just a basic understanding of what's happening in our major continents. So Europe, for the most part, is struggling. Wars, disease, religious conflict, all kinds of issues that are making Europe a pretty awful place to live at the time. Asia, however, is much more unified and is very prosperous. So they hold a lot of the trade, a lot of the goods. And so Europeans are trying to access those trade routes and trying to find better ways to increase the trade to Asia. Africa is known at this time for some very, very strong coastal empires, and slavery is already in existence. So for period 1, the way that Africa will mostly be incorporated into this unit is by the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade. And so understanding some of those basics of what's happening on the continent prior to the transatlantic slave trade will help you understand how Europeans manipulated that system. Okay, and then the Americas, you're going to see 500 to 600 independent societies, very diverse cultures, really dependent on that environment. So moving forward, the APUSH curriculum kind of separates the North America into 4 distinct regions, and it wants you to know some specifics about each region. So that will be in our, here are some of those details. So what you have to know about this key concept is some basic information about each major continent. And then what you want to know is the diversity of life. So Mexico and the American Southwest, you want to know about the maize cultivation and the irrigation that they were able to create. So the way they manipulated more of a dry environment to still create massive farms that allowed for more permanent and larger settlements, for example, the Aztec. The Great Basin and Great Plains, a very arid area, and so they have that mobile lifestyle that some tend to think about as being more characteristic of American Indians, but really was more just regional. Okay, and then the third region, the Northeast, the Mississippi River Valley, the Atlantic Seaboard. This is going to have a lot of big variation. It's a huge, huge region. And so it's got mixed economy. Some places are more hunter-gatherer. Some are going to have cultivation of corn, beans, and squash. But we do see largely more permanent civilizations here. One example would be Cahokia, which was also known as the Mound Builders. Okay, then we have the Northwest and present-day California, and this region is known for having more vast resources, so not only the availability of hunter-gatherer economy, but also agriculture and also the fishing resources from the ocean. And so in this area, we actually see people who have a pretty artistic way of life, or we see a lot of artistic artifacts because the food supply was so plentiful. So really the must know here is that American Indians adapted to and transformed their environment. So their way of life was impacted by their environment, but they also then changed their environment to fit their needs. Moving on to key concept number 2. Contact among Europeans, Native Americans, and Africans resulted in the Columbian exchange and significant social, cultural, and political changes on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. This is the bigger part of period 1. So this is where you really want to make sure you're understanding. So you got to know the motives for exploration. Why was Europe trying to go around the world? And this is where a lot of people call it the 3 Gs: God, gold, and glory. There's various motivations, but almost all of them come back to these 3. They want to spread their religion. Do they want to do that in a kind way? Maybe not so much. But they want to force their religion upon other people and convert others to whether it be Catholicism or Protestantism. And then gold, that just refers to profit. So they want to expand trade and access the goods that are found in Asia. And then glory, there's that idea of nationalism. There's that personal glory that a lot of the conquistadors are trying to obtain. What allowed for exploration to occur? A lot of things. There were innovations and improvements all kind of occurring simultaneously that allowed for transatlantic voyages to be successful, whereas prior to this, it just wasn't possible. So we see some devastation in Europe subside, and the Renaissance and scientific revolution will begin, which just creates a more curious atmosphere and a society that's less dependent on just trying to survive, but actually can go out and explore the world. New technology will begin. A lot of changes to the way that ships are happening, like a relocation of the rudder, and then there's also the compass, and then also joint stock companies. That's going to come just a little bit later. The Spanish won't quite use it, but those joint stock companies are going to allow for the risk of transatlantic voyages to be pooled among investors. Okay, big thing here. The Columbian exchange, your very important term, probably the most important term from period 1. This is going to basically describe the ramifications that occurred because of the increased interactions. So as you can see here on this map, there's a whole variety of things going from continent to continent. But primarily what you want to know is that the largest impact on the Americas was disease. As high as 90% of American Indians died as a result of diseases such as measles and smallpox. And then Europe is going to see significant wealth as a result of new access to the precious metals found in the Americas, especially the Spanish, and also they're going to see a lot of food crops that are going to thrive in the European environment, which will then allow their populations to grow, and so on and so forth. And then colonization at this time, in period 1, the 2 big colonizers are Spain and Portugal, but Spain is going to really be dominant in the region. And the reason for that was, number 1, disease. American Indians were vulnerable to these diseases, and so were not able to mount the resistance that they would have had they been healthy. And then the weaponry was more advanced on the European side, and then the Spanish did ally with a lot of the enemies of the larger American Indian groups. For example, with the Aztec, Cortez made alliances with the enemies of the Aztec, and then overthrew the Aztec Empire and then subjugated all the American Indians in the region. Okay, topic 1.5 is really about the various labor and caste systems that developed. So the encomienda system is developed, and that one pretty much targeted the American Indians. So it's supposed to be a mutually beneficial relationship in which the American Indians would provide labor and get to be converted to the Spanish, and then the Spanish would provide protection to the American Indians. But in reality, they needed the most protection from the Spanish. So that's the encomienda system. And then the transatlantic slave trade is also discussed in this topic. So the beginnings of the Middle Passage and a description of how Africans grew to replace American Indians because the American Indians were dying, and it also was their turf, if you will, it was their homeland, and so they were able to escape. They knew the land much better, whereas Africans going across the ocean would have been less familiar. And because Africans had trade networks with the Europeans, they were less vulnerable to those European diseases. Okay, and now because of this new combination of groups of people, we see a caste system, a social hierarchy, a very strict a rigid set of rules regarding what different groups of people were able to do and the wealth and the freedoms that they had. And we see new people groups developing as well. So as populations merged, often by force, we see groups of Spanish and American Indians, or Spanish and Africans, or combinations of those as years went on. So that caste system becomes a significant part of society in the Spanish Empire. Okay, and then your last real content objective in this unit is going to be cultural differences. So talking about misunderstandings over land ownership, family and gender roles, and how that led to conflict. And the most significant conflict that you want to know is going to be the Pueblo Revolt, also known as Pope's Rebellion. And this one is emphasized in the APUSH curriculum because the Pueblo were actually successful. They were able to overthrow the Spanish in much of the American Southwest, and so then they were able to go back to their traditional way of life for about 10 years before the Spanish came back in. And even once the Spanish kind of infiltrated the area again, they still had to accommodate some of the cultural practices of the Pueblo, specifically some of their religious practices. And then also in this last section, Bartolome de las Casas is a name that you should be familiar with. He becomes known as the defender of the Indians, and he is a priest in the area, and he ends up writing to the king describing the atrocities of what is happening, the forced conversions, etc. And a new system of laws ends up being created on how the Spanish should treat American Indians. And this does end up fueling the African slave trade as well, because if the Spanish are supposed to treat the American Indians better, then they desired a different labor force. And so that's where we see the African slave trade also increase as a result. So the must knows from Key Concept 1.2, you've got to know the reasons for exploration, the 3 Gs, Columbian exchange, biggest vocab word of the unit, and you need to know the effects of Spanish colonization, so looking at the various labor systems, the changes in demographics, and then also knowing the resistance efforts, specifically the Pueblo Revolt. So in this unit, the main skill that you're going to be working on is causation. This unit really emphasizes the changes that are occurring worldwide. So the focus is on those causes and effects, and the specific example that the curriculum gives you is transatlantic voyages. Now, because this question or this unit is unlikely to show up in a written essay, I did create a short answer question for you because it could be similar to what would happen in question 3. And so if you want to check that out, go to my writing playlist and you'll see that I have a question about the transatlantic voyages where you would really practice this skill of causation with the idea that there were those causes, right? The changes in the ship or the environment in Europe, and then the effects, looking at some of those things like the Columbian Exchange. So very important terms. There are more than just 5. However, I just specifically addressed the ones that are listed in the curriculum. If it's not listed in the curriculum specifically, it's something where the College Board would have to give you a bit of a description. But these 5 terms are specifically listed in the curriculum, which means that you just have to know what they mean. And so I have a very short video on every single one of these terms if you want to check those out for review. And then lastly, these are the 3 key themes that the College Board addresses. The geography and the environment. This would be looking at how Native Americans adapted to and transformed their environment. America in the world. This would be looking at really those transatlantic voyages and how that began to change how America existed in this global society that was just starting to develop. And then social structures, this is where you could look at the caste system or various labor systems and how those new things impacted those demographic changes. So last, this is how I tell my students to review for exams. To start with the learning objectives. This is what the College Board tells you have to know. So I just tell them, read each learning objective. So here's letter A. Explain the context for European encounters in the Americas from 1491 to 1607. And then you just try to answer it. Write a sentence or 2 where you describe what is happening in Europe in 1491. Why did they want to go to the Americas, or how did that happen? So take some time to literally read each objective and write a couple sentences. That is one of the best things you can do to tell where are the parts of the curriculum that you're not quite there yet and which ones you need to just study a little bit more. So thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and let me know if I missed anything or if it was helpful.